Like all great trashy horror films from back in the day, if it sold really well, then a sequel is inevitable. So in late 1992, Namco decided to release a sequel to its arcade smash hit Splatterhouse, only this time around it was an exclusive on the Sega Genesis. No arcade release, and no TurboGrafx-16 port. But at this point, Sega was doing a pretty good job at kicking Nintendo in the teeth with an aggressive marketing campaign, which played off the Genesis as being the cool and mature console, while all the little kids were over there playing Fantasyland on the NES. But you know, hey, with the way that things were going, and with Mortal Kombat just over the horizon, you'd think that Splatterhouse would be a perfect fit on the Genesis, right? Let's play some damn games and find out. The intro is pretty impressive, and it showcases the same brand of spooky sights and sounds that made the original so popular. Everything here just looks great, and the title track is probably my favorite song in the entire franchise. We learn that 3 months have gone by and Rick is still being tormented by nightmares of the events of the first game until one day, the Terrormask contacts Rick and tells him that Jennifer didn't have to die that fateful night and offers to help him rescue her. All he has to do is just go back to Dr. West's house, which apparently burned to the ground in the last game, and that's good enough for me. The first level starts off with Rick waking up in what I can only assume is the remains of the original house, where you fight a few familiar enemies while you get used to the game's controls. Kinda makes me wonder if these are supposed to be those flaming creatures that you had to dodge at the end of the first one, and if they are, what the hell have they been doing all this time, sitting in the woods and getting loaded? Once you reach the end of the stage, you come across the first boss, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions about what this thing looks like. The fight itself isn't too difficult. It just seems like one of those things where you hit each other until someone runs out of health. And of course there's always going to be some sort of gross death involving bodily fluids spilling on the floor. But so far, everything's starting off on the right foot, and personally, I always loved revisiting familiar scenes and sequels and seeing the aftermath. It's kind of like in Simon's Quest or Castlevania Bloodlines, where you see the ruins of the castle after Dracula's dead. Very well done. One thing I thought was pretty funny was this quick sequence of the demon who can't decide what he's more afraid of. This one runs in to warn his friends that Rick is back, so they get scared and run off in the opposite direction, only to get annihilated by something off screen. And once the last one sees Rick, he says to hell with it and runs off towards the monster in the dark that killed his friends. What a dipshit. Stage 2 starts off in an elevator, and this is where you first run into the main enemy of the game. In fact, aside from a couple select moments, it's pretty much the only enemy that you encounter in the entire playthrough. These things have a punch that has more range than yours, so walking up and hitting them is just out of the question. As the game progresses, they take more hits to kill. Your best bet is to just jump in and kick them and hope they don't punch your lights out in the process. The annoying thing about them is that when they aren't punching you, they're jumping all over the screen yelling like Michael Jackson. This is also the first time you come across your first set of stage hazards, and these spike traps are the worst. Some go up and some go down and some are stationary, but because they're laid out at an isometric angle, jump distances and perspectives are all sorts of screwed up here, and that leads to unnecessary hits. It's even more frustrating that the first level has stage hazards too, but at least they were done right and you have no problem leaping over them. The boss fight for this level is a giant purple head that hawks phantom loogies at you, and he looks like Freddy Krueger. This one actually has a pretty easy strategy for you to pick up on, and once you beat him, his eyeballs burst out. Just, wow. I should address the elephant in the room and mention that Rick's appearance has changed yet again, but there might actually be a couple good reasons why. Now keep in mind this isn't a concrete fact and it's my own personal speculation, but it's no secret that Splatterhouse was inspired by horror classics like Evil Dead and Friday the 13th. And if Splatterhouse was going to be a serious, legit franchise, then eventually the main character was going to need his own identity. And constantly being compared to Jason Voorhees wasn't going to help the cause much. So this seemed like the next logical step. It's either that, or there's no big secret either that Japan had a long, rich history of taking ideas from the West, bringing it over to their shores, and turning it into its own thing. I remember when I was a kid, I used to get pro wrestling tapes from Japan of death matches where you could see Super Leatherface beating the shit out of Freddy Krueger with a barbed wire 2x4. And now that Splatterhouse is hitting a mainstream console in a country with way different copyright laws, let's face it, Sega would have gotten murdered by Paramount Pictures. But you know, the end result is what the end result was, and the American version, the mask now looks like a skull, while in Japan, it looks like a kabuki mask. Because, why not? The graphics and the presentation and all the levels are really good, but there's not much more I could say that I haven't already said when I talked about the first Splatterhouse. I mean, aside from things looking more dirty and gritty, I suppose one thing that really did stand out to me was they got really creative with the lighting and the foreground effects. And yeah, it looks great, but for all the screwing around they did with the mask and the lighting effects, they didn't touch the controls from the original, which means that they're still sluggish as all hell, and because of that, Stage 3 really goes above and beyond the Call of Duty for busting my balls. The whole level is you walking along a riverbed while you fight more of these stupid howling assholes while jumping over puddles. And in case it hasn't set in yet that jumping over stage hazards in this game is next to impossible, just wait until the fish pop out. The boss fight here takes place in a work shed fighting demon babies that drop out of the ceiling. There's a neat throwback to the Poltergeist boss from the original, and after that, all you really have to do is just stand in between the holes in the ceiling and hit them as they drop down. And after you kill the final one, a heart breaks through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man, and you hit it a couple of times and it explodes, covering the screen in blood. You know, not for nothing, that looks pretty badass. Each level starts off with a small intro that tries to add a little more backstory as you go through the game, and I've got mixed feelings about this. Because the intro to Stage 4 reveals that there's another house on an island, and what the fuck have I been doing this whole time? Well, it turns out that Americans got a different story laid out for us, so no matter how you slice it, it's bound to be confusing for somebody. You see, the whole story revolves around the idea that Rick is going to rescue Jennifer, and in the intro for the Mega Drive version, the mask tells you to find the hidden house. And granted, the whole concept of there being a second mansion in the woods is pretty stupid. At least it's something. Meanwhile, in the American intro, Rick is specifically told to go back to the house, which implies that we're going back to the original house, and that's only going to confuse the hell out of anybody who played the original. The level itself is just you running along a bridge while you're getting chased by an octopus until you come across this area where you fight these goofy zombies that look like chuds. Now these guys are obnoxious, but they're nothing compared to these spirits that reverse your controls to make you fall down one of these holes in the ground. If you fall down the hole, you wind up in a sewer level that's full of spike traps and zombies, and seriously, to hell with this area. The boss fight here is some weird lizard thing that sticks his tongue out at you, and he manages to do the damn slide attack better than I ever could. Just when you think you've killed him, his head grows legs like in The Thing and runs around kicking your ass all over the area. Part of the problem here is the hit detection is so lopsided. The enemies can hit you whenever they want. Meanwhile, you need pinpoint accuracy to land a hit without getting hit yourself, and you guessed it, there's no health pickups in the entire damn game. But the second that this thing falls on its back and does a chicken dance, there's no better feeling in the world. Oh my god, how many times do I have to fight these stupid things? You know, I complained earlier about the lack of enemies, but it's really starting to weigh on me here. Where are the anime ghosts and the fat-headed aliens and the bats? I can't believe I'm actually missing fucking bats in a video game. And folks, I don't want to alarm you, but there is no Biggie Man or Biggie Men in the house. Instead, you get these stupid bastards, and the only satisfaction that you get out of fighting them is when they're stupid enough to fall into a stage trap. This right here is what I call the gauntlet stage, because there's always that one level in a game where it's more difficult than the rest. Developers usually pull this sort of bullshit when they're worried about a game either being too easy or not long enough. So they try to extend the life of the game artificially by doing this nonsense. They did it in Ghosts and Goblins by making you play through the game twice. They did it in Ninja Gaiden by starting you off after Mouth instead of the beginning of the hallway before the final boss. And they're doing it here by making you go through 5 different sections. And if you run out of lives, it starts you over from the first room. You think I'm crazy? Well, check this out. Every single stage up to this point has been 1 or 2 sections before you fight the boss, and then you move on to the next level. Meanwhile, stage 5 starts you off in a long hallway with the howling jackasses, and you dodge taxidermied rams that puke on you. Next, we've got a library with a bunch of severed hands moving between foreground bookcases that block your view. Once you get past that, you hit the test tube hallway, which plays out the exact same way as the Hall of Mirrors did in the original, where things randomly pop out and kick your ass. Moving past that, you hit a sewer with indestructible slime, and my god, I hate this level more than anything. And finally, you hit the laboratory where the boss is some guy in a lab coat, and it's supposed to have some sort of significance because we've possibly come across Dr. West's reanimated corpse. Or, according to the American instruction book, this is supposed to be someone named Dr. Mueller.
Bueller?
No, Mueller. But I could understand the confusion here because who the hell is this guy? A lab assistant, another doctor that took over after Dr. West disappeared? Seriously, he's never mentioned anywhere in the game aside from the instruction book, and the Japanese manual says nothing about him at all. Why does this whole thing have to be so friggin' complicated? Now that right there is stage 5 in its entirety. Meanwhile, stage 6 is literally just a boss fight where you read off forbidden ancient words to break the seal to hell.
Wait a minute. The words. Right. Say the words. Klaatu, Marada. Okay then. That's it.
Everything's cool. I said the word. I did. Do it.
After the short cutscene, you punch a couple of floating enemies and you follow Jennifer down the hole. And honestly, I can't even start to wrap my head around the logic of structuring a level like this. All I do know is that it sucks, it's fucking annoying, it aggravates me, it pisses me off, and I'm pretty much over the game at this point. But hey, I've come this far, so I might as well finish it. And honestly, I really hate feeling like this because the game's not terrible. It's sadly just one of those things that for every one thing that they got right, they screwed something else up. The graphics look really good, but the enemy variety is abysmal. The stage design is cool and has great effects, but they didn't even attempt to fix up the controls in this game. And seriously, after 2 years, they didn't even attempt to fix it after reading player feedback and seeing how people reacted to playing the first one. And that right there is bullshit. And you feel it even more in stage 7, because that's the level where they start throwing these little flying Medusa enemies at you, and they're next to impossible to hit. It's just designed to wear you down so that when you take on the giant crystal boss, you've got nothing left, and you guessed it, game over screen, which leads back to the vortex part. Once you finally free Jennifer, you both get chased out of hell by a naked blue man. All you have to do is just keep running to the right and you're golden, but now the mansion's falling apart and you and Jennifer have to haul ass. Homestretch starts off with Rick and Jennifer in the same elevator from stage 2 while Rick fights off two chuds that just won't die while avoiding getting blasted with brown bricks falling from the ceiling. And seriously, I don't mind the chuds, but the bricks annoyed the hell out of me. Yeah, it does fall in a pattern that you can figure out after about 4 or 5 lives, but even then, it's still really easy to get hit because there's no shadow or anything to indicate when they're going to fall. Couple that with losing your position fighting the zombies, and it's just another wear you down kind of stage. Once you're finally done with that part, there's a speedboat sequence where you finally get to take out the octopus from earlier by punching the thorns that he throws you out of midair and hucking it right back into his eye. And seriously, I love this section. It's a fresh breath of air compared to the rest of the game. It's also challenging, and each hit that you nail on the boss feels so satisfying. After the octopussy's done, we're finally reaching the shore where we come across the last boss, which is just a big blobby mess of... I don't know. It definitely puts that one form from Dracula's Curse to shame, but not for nothing, this is a great boss fight. Huge improvement over the original. This is one of those great fights that moves at a really frantic pace and you're gonna get killed a couple of times, but once you've mastered the pattern, you can blaze through it and look like a pro in the process. After he dies, we're given an ending sequence that leaves us with the message that as long as the mask remains, all this shit can happen again, which means, you guessed it, another fucking sequel. So yeah, that was my experience with Splatterhouse 2, and it's a rough one. It's a rough one, I tell you. No, seriously though, these days anybody can get the original trilogy and play it anytime that they want. Back in '92, this was a lot of people's first experience with Splatterhouse. So in the interest of being fair to the people who dearly love this game, you kind of have to look at this from two different angles. Because on one hand, you've got this game that you've only read about in magazines, which is finally being brought over to a more mainstream console that chances are you probably owned. And not for nothing, it did deliver. The graphics were great, the music was fantastic, the challenge was through the roof, it was unapologetically gory, and it did have that arcade-style action that people really seemed to be into at the time. It was the port that we always wanted. But on the off chance that you did have the TurboGrafx 16 and you did play the original, you're probably not going to be too impressed with this one, because you've already seen this shit before. And that's probably why I've got less patience for this one than I do with the original, because this one is good, it's just not as good as the original. And not for nothing, yeah, the graphics are better and the music blows the original's music out of the water. There's still nothing really there under the surface that advances it, that pushes it forward, that gets it past that precedence that the original one released. Basically, it's the sequel that nobody ever asked for. And just looking back, I think it's really, really weird that Namco would just abandon the arcades like that and totally bypass a TurboGrafx 16 and release it on another company's console like that. That would almost be like if Sega released Sonic 2 as an exclusive title on the Commodore CD-TV. I looked everywhere I could think up, and there's virtually no information about the game's development or why this decision was even made in the first place. I mean, the only thing that I could come up with is just that at this point, arcades just weren't as popular as they used to be. They were still big business over in Japan, but in America, consoles seemed to be the way to go. And as far as consoles go, there's no way in hell that Nintendo would have ever allowed a game like this on their console. And on the surface, that seems like a reasonable explanation. But if you dig down a little bit deeper, there seems to be a pretty big history of Nintendo and Namco just not getting along very well. At this point in time, it seemed like Nintendo took the whole Tengen thing really personally, so they denied Namco's distribution license renewal. So I suppose the next logical step to sticking it to Nintendo would be to release a highly anticipated sequel on a competing console. And they did just that when Namco CEO Masaya Nakamura issued a directive that all future console developments were going to be exclusively for Sega consoles. How'd that one work out for him? That's going to have to be a story for another day. And on that note, I just wanted to say thanks so much for dropping by and inviting me into your day like this. I really appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope you guys are having a great week, and be sure to tune in for part 3 when we finish off the trilogy and do Splatterhouse 3. So take care. Auf Wiedersehen. Bye now. Stage 7 starts you off in a vortex, and you just knock out flying enemies. I mean, yeah, oh, no! Like all the great arcade... like all the great trashy flicks from back... films, motherfucker! English, do you speak it? But, on the other hand, on the off chance, am I British? I'm one of those... No, that's Scottish. I've got a Scottish accent. We can have other British YouTubers over there, and I can be the one Scottish one. Fucking hell. So yeah, that was my experience with the original Splatterhouse. The original? I'm playing the second one! So yeah, that was my experience with Splatterhouse. Why am I acting all intense now? I feel like I'm gonna come through the camera and fucking strangle you. Okay. Alright, let's tone it down a little there, Chief. Probably why I have less patience with this one. Is because I've done it all with the first one anyway, so what does it matter? It's good. It's just not as good as... fuck that. Boom! I'm gonna have to look at this from two different perspectives. Because on one hand, you've got this game that most people... No. And now that Splatterhouse is hitting a mainstream console which played off the Genesis as the cool and mature console, while congratulations. I've had the patience to beat this fucking game.